The winter evening of December 9th, 1965, began like any other in the quiet Pennsylvania countryside surrounding Kecksburg. The temperature had dropped to a bitter cold, and the bare branches of the forest trees stood like skeletal fingers against the darkening sky. Snow patches dotted the landscape, creating an almost ethereal silence that would soon be shattered by an event that would echo through decades of mystery and speculation. At precisely 4:43 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, thousands of witnesses across 6 states and Canada observed a brilliant fireball streaking across the heavens. Unlike the typical meteor that burns up in the atmosphere within seconds, this object exhibited characteristics that defied conventional explanation. According to calculations by Clark McClelland, a former NASA Apollo space program member, and Dr. Paul Enér, professor of astronomy, the object was traveling at approximately 1,000 miles per hour, significantly slower than the 25,000 to 144,000 miles per hour typical of meteors entering Earth's atmosphere. Bill "Bully" Bush was working on his 1964 Corvette at his home when he first noticed the red ball of fire crossing the sky. What struck him immediately was the object's apparent intelligence in its movement. It come up and went towards the mountain just like if it was radio-controlled, Bush would later testify. It made a figure 8 and it come right down in here and belly landed right in here, knocked the top of the trees out. The object's descent was unlike anything witnesses had ever observed. Rather than the chaotic, uncontrolled plunge of space debris, this craft appeared to execute deliberate maneuvers. Over area Ohio, the object made a remarkable 25-degree course correction, a feat impossible for natural meteoroids. As it approached Pennsylvania, it made another calculated turn between Greensburg and Latrobe, tracking northeast toward the Kecksburg area with what appeared to be purposeful navigation. The bronze-colored, acorn-shaped craft measured approximately 10 to 12 feet in length and 8 to 10 feet in diameter. As it descended through the forest canopy at a controlled 30-degree angle, it systematically broke tree limbs in its path, creating a 25-foot-long trench upon impact. The craft embedded itself into the frozen Pennsylvania soil, its seamless metallic surface gleaming with an otherworldly luster that volunteer fireman Jim Romansky would later describe as unlike any metal he had encountered in his 30 years as a seasoned machinist. What made the crash site even more extraordinary was the complete absence of fire damage. Despite the object's fiery descent through the atmosphere, there were no scorch marks on the surrounding trees or ground. Instead, witnesses reported a strange sulfuric smell, like rotten eggs, emanating from the craft, accompanied by intermittent blue electrical arcing that danced across its surface like ethereal lightning. The craft's most enigmatic feature was the band of hieroglyphic-like symbols encircling its base. These markings, resembling ancient Egyptian writing but distinctly alien in their configuration, consisted of broken lines, dots, rectangles, circles, stars, and dashes. Romansky, whose father was originally from Kiev and could read both Polish and Russian, definitively stated that the symbols bore no resemblance to any Slavic languages, effectively ruling out theories that the craft was of Soviet origin. As Bush approached the embedded craft in those first crucial moments before military arrival, he observed blue lights flashing intermittently from the object. The craft appeared to be cooling down from its atmospheric entry, with sparks occasionally emanating from its surface, just like if it was cooling off. It was red hot. The perfectly flat bottom and raised ring or bumper around the craft's circumference suggested sophisticated engineering far beyond 1960s human technology. The forest itself seemed to respond to the craft's presence. local wildlife had fled the area entirely, leaving an unnatural silence that was broken only by the occasional electrical discharge from the mysterious object. The trees immediately surrounding the impact site showed signs of electromagnetic interference, with some witnesses reporting that their watches had stopped and car radios experienced significant static in the vicinity. Within this frozen tableau of broken branches, disturbed earth, and the gleaming bronze craft, the first chapter of one of America's most enduring UFO mysteries had begun. The object sat half buried in the Pennsylvania woods, its hieroglyphic symbols catching the last light of the winter evening, waiting for the arrival of both curious civilians and military personnel who would soon transform this quiet forest clearing into the center of a decades-long controversy that continues to this day. Within an hour of the mysterious object's impact in the Kecksburg woods, the quiet Pennsylvania countryside transformed into a scene reminiscent of a military operation. The speed and coordination of the response suggested that this was no routine meteor recovery, but rather the activation of protocols designed for situations of the highest national security importance. Project Blue Book had dispatched a 3-man Air Force team from the 662 Radar Squadron at Oakdale Army Installation near Pittsburgh, operating under the control of the Aerospace Defense Command. These orders were presumably issued by Major Hector Quintanilla, who had taken control of Blue Book in 1963. However, the military presence that descended upon Kecksburg far exceeded the official 3-man team acknowledged in Blue Book's 33-page report on the incident. Kecksburg residents provided detailed descriptions of multiple types of military personnel that flooded the area. U.S. Army soldiers equipped with M1 rifles established a perimeter around the crash site, while Air Force personnel in distinctive blue fatigues and blue berets coordinated the recovery operation. The blue berets were particularly significant as they likely belonged to the Strategic Air Command's elite guard, established in 1956 under General Curtis LeMay, or possibly the newly formed 1041st Security Police Squadron, which had been implementing Operation Safe Side since 1965. Even more intriguing were the men in civilian clothing who appeared to be directing the operation, barking orders with the authority of high-ranking officials. Some witnesses described personnel in hazmat suits, which locals dubbed moon suits, suggesting concerns about potential radiation or biological contamination. The presence of such protective equipment indicated that military leadership understood they were dealing with something far more significant than a conventional meteor. Local resident David Newhouse found himself staring down the barrel of an M1 rifle when he attempted to approach the crash site. Certain things you never forget. First time I ever had a gun pointed at me, kinda hard to forget that, Newhouse recalled. That guy was in the Army, and that was a military rifle. I was in the Army. I know what rifles are. I like guns, but I don't like them pointed at me. The military had established a command post in a farmhouse atop the hill, overlooking the crash site, from which brass officers coordinated the recovery operation. According to Jim Romansky, who witnessed the operation as a volunteer fireman, the military presence was overwhelming. By the time we got back to the fire hall, it was wall-to-wall military. There were trucks and jeeps and cars, and there were guards on the door. The operation's scale became apparent as convoy after convoy of military vehicles arrived throughout the night. Flatbed trucks, personnel carriers, and specialized equipment transporters converged on the rural area. The Pennsylvania State Police had cordoned off all access roads, while Army personnel established multiple checkpoints to control civilian access. The coordination required for such a rapid deployment suggested pre-existing contingency plans for exactly this type of incident. Jerry Betters, a Pittsburgh jazz musician who lived near Kecksburg, encountered one of these military roadblocks while attempting to investigate the crash. Armed soldiers in army fatigues with cloth berets halted his vehicle, while other soldiers equipped with rifles and helmets stood at attention behind the roadblock. Betters observed numerous military brass officers, well-dressed civilians, and scattered army-starred and blazing jeeps and personnel trucks. The most significant moment of Betters' encounter came when he observed a large flatbed trailer emerging from the woods, carrying a domed, acorn-shaped object partially covered by a tarp. Out of this woods came this flatbed truck, army truck. On the back of this thing was this object, acorn-type shape, maybe a little bigger than a Volkswagen, Betters testified in a notarized document. The truck appeared to struggle traversing the rough terrain, suggesting the recovered object possessed considerable weight. When Betters and his companions attempted to get a closer look, they found themselves on the business end of several soldiers' weapons. An officer shouted at the soldiers, "Get these people out of here." The civilian witnesses were forced to leave, but not before Betters caught a glimpse of what lay beneath the tarp. "I could see what it was shaped like, and I could see this hieroglyphic stuff all around the back, and that's when they chased us out." Throughout the night, military personnel maintained strict operational security. Radio communications were conducted on encrypted frequencies, and civilian emergency responders found their normal communication channels jammed or redirected. Local fire departments and police were effectively shut out of the operation, despite their initial involvement in responding to reports of a downed aircraft. The recovery operation continued through the early morning hours of December 10th, with multiple witnesses reporting the departure of the mysterious object on military transport vehicles. The precision and efficiency of the operation suggested extensive prior planning and the involvement of specialized crash retrieval teams, possibly the legendary Blue Berets, referenced by UFO researcher Leonard Stringfield, who described a rapid reaction special forces unit capable of operating secretly and effectively by using diversionary tactics to prevent public interference. By dawn, the military presence had largely vanished, leaving behind only disturbed earth and confused local residents who had been witnesses to one of the most comprehensive and coordinated UFO recovery operations in documented history. 3 days after the Kecksburg incident, the mysterious bronze bell found its way to one of America's most secretive military installations, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. The facility, long rumored to house recovered extraterrestrial technology, became the final destination for the enigmatic craft that had captivated and terrified the residents of a small Pennsylvania town. Myron, a truck driver working for a family-owned brick and tile business in Ohio, became an unwitting witness to one of the most closely guarded secrets in military history. His company had been contracted to deliver a large order of specialized double-glazed engineered bricks to Wright-Patterson, with the customer identified as the U.S. Navy, an unusual client for an Air Force base. The bricks, according to Myron, were intended to construct a double-thick, lead-lined protective structure around the Kecksburg UFO to protect against radiation. Upon arriving at Wright-Patterson through a designated gate, Myron and his cousin J.S. were met by a 2- or 3-star general dressed in a blue uniform. The general personally escorted the delivery team to a brick warehouse located 50 to 80 feet inside the base, accessible only by a narrow blacktop driveway surrounded by rows of offices and a power plant. The level of security and personal attention from such high-ranking personnel indicated the extraordinary importance of whatever lay within that warehouse. Outside the building, Myron observed 4 or 5 frantic personnel wearing white coveralls, visor headgear, rubber gloves and boots, and .45 pistols, running around like chickens with their heads cut off. Their protective gear and obvious agitation suggested they were dealing with something far beyond their normal experience or training. Near the warehouse sat an Army 35-foot-long triaxle lowboy trailer, still draped with a tarp over its midsection, the same type of transport vehicle witnesses had observed leaving the Kecksburg woods. During a break in the unloading process, Myron's curiosity overcame his caution. He approached the warehouse door undetected and peered inside, witnessing a scene that would haunt him for decades. The interior was dominated by metal scaffolding surrounding a large, strange object, with personnel working frantically around it. Parachute silks hung suspended from the ceiling, partially shrouding the object, while a single floodlight directed downward provided the only illumination. The craft itself was unmistakably the same bell-shaped object described by Kecksburg witnesses. Measuring approximately 10 feet tall and less than 10 feet wide, it appeared metallic, with a dull copper or bronze color, but was charred or covered in a sooty residue from its atmospheric entry. The seamless construction and hieroglyphic markings around its base confirmed this was no human-made device from any known Earth technology. What made Myron's observation even more remarkable was his interaction with one of the technicians working on the craft. Finding his curiosity irresistible, Myron asked about the acetylene torch being used by one of the workers. Probably thinking that my presence there meant I had a proper clearance, the man who was wearing a visor told me he was trying to get inside, Myron later told legendary UFO researcher Leonard Stringfield. The technician revealed the extraordinary difficulty they were encountering in attempting to breach the craft's hull. All conventional methods had failed. Acetylene torches, diamond-headed drill bits, and even acid had proven ineffective against the mysterious metal. This information aligned perfectly with testimony from other alleged UFO recovery cases where witnesses described craft materials that seemed to resist all human attempts at analysis or penetration. Even more disturbing was the technician's offhand comment about potential occupants. I was surprised when he told me that if there were bodies inside, they might be too hot for the mortician to handle, Myron recounted. This casual reference to bodies suggested that the military personnel were operating under the assumption that the craft might contain biological entities, a consideration that would be unnecessary for conventional space debris or military hardware. The warehouse scene represented a convergence of America's most advanced scientific and military capabilities attempting to unlock the secrets of technology that appeared to be centuries, if not millennia, ahead of human understanding. The lead-lined protective structure being constructed around the craft indicated serious concerns about radiation or other unknown energy emissions. The Navy personnel overseeing the operation, despite its location at an Air Force base, suggested inter-service cooperation at the highest levels of classification. Myron's unauthorized glimpse into the warehouse was abruptly terminated when a guard discovered his presence. "Forget what you've seen, or we'll lock you up and throw away the keys," the guard warned, a threat that kept Myron silent about his experience for nearly 30 decades. The Kecksburg object's presence at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base placed it within the same facility that allegedly housed debris from the 1947 Roswell incident and other recovered anomalous materials. The base's Blue Room, referenced by Senator Barry Goldwater and others, had long been rumored to contain evidence of extraterrestrial visitation. The careful construction of specialized containment facilities and the involvement of multiple military branches suggested that the Kecksburg recovery was part of a broader, ongoing program to study and reverse engineer technologies of unknown origin. The warehouse at Wright-Patterson became a modern-day treasure vault, housing artifacts that could potentially revolutionize human understanding of physics, material science, and our place in the universe. Yet the secrets contained within those lead-lined walls remained locked away from public scrutiny, protected by layers of classification and the sworn silence of those few individuals who had glimpsed the impossible made manifest in a quiet Ohio warehouse.